So today we wanted to go to something, as we are all friends in the room and also virtually, and everybody that is connected as well, we probably have a lot of friends around. We want this to be like a very easy conversation, candid, with a certain intimacy also, because we want to go to the deep subjects that probably are in our inner concerns about what happens in Europe at that level. We talk about a lot about roadmaps in Europe, but I'm sure there's many roadmaps that every one of us we have in our minds, and we can see that when the question is raised, and we have to also bring our perspective on these roadmaps, these different strategies, the ambition that we have at the European level and beyond. That's why we have here today Miguel, Jean, Paolo, and Jackie, because these are the words that we want to hear from them, the ones that are going to lead us in the next months for sure. So for us, the real question is, can we turn it all into an actual usable pathway for developers, for hospitals, for payers? There's a lot about this to talk about. So that's why I want them to kind of take the lead, introduce themselves, and give like a first statement. Actually, my first question is, what is one thing we say publicly about ATMPs in Europe that is true, but it's incomplete, misleading, or too comfortable? So we need to tackle a little bit more uncomfortable things if we want really things to move forward. So I will ask the same thing to them, the four of them, but then every one of you, when you answer, please state who you are and why you are. I think you have to share with us which is your insight on this subject. We can start with Jackie, because I have her in the first level in my screen.
So I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult in the UK. We've been in operation since 2012. And we were set up actually to address some of the things you're saying, Monse. What's the roadmap? What's required to get ATMPs from out of the lab bench all the way through to being used in the hospital? So that's really what we want to do. And we're set up in such a way that we want to develop companies within the UK and encourage companies to come to the UK to use the infrastructure. So your question was, what's true for ATMPs and what's incomplete in Europe? Now, I suppose I have to hold my hand up saying post-Brexit, the UK is part of Europe but not part of the EU. But I'm going to answer that from Europe as a whole. I think we have a lot of good science here. I think we know the field quite well. Perhaps not quite as vibrant as the US because of the level of investment, or China, which is just grown exponentially. But I think what's incomplete is taking the ATMPs that we're good at developing and actually getting them through and paid for and used at a national and international level, I suppose. So that would be my response to your question, Monse.
It actually does. I think it's very valid that we take a little bit to be brave and say what we still see that is lacking, and we sometimes give for granted, and let's not accept it if we want to move forward. So that's why I'm going to ask now Jim, because Jim, I know that you are like a very let's say straightforward voice when we talk about things that should be done at European level, and I want us all to hear about that from you.
So honestly, I would maybe say that Jackie kind of stole my line there. But I can start by introducing myself. So my name is Jim Lund. I'm the Chief Strategy Innovation Officer at something called CCM Nordic, so similar to the Catapult. And then I would say, if Jackie stole my line there, I would say, I guess there's a lot of, people say we are bad, in clinical trials in Europe. And I think kind of that is misleading. I think we're very good on clinical trials, but our problem is that there are many countries that are a lot better, that has, invested, both in policy and work very strategically, to become, better in this area. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement on the clinical trial side. definitely you guys down there in Catalonia are working very hard on this. So I think there are obviously exceptions. And I would hope that a lot of other part of Europe could look at you guys and use you as an example on how to get things right, because in the end I think clinical trials are obviously extremely important if you want to develop pharmaceuticals in Europe still.
Well, thank you. That's reassuring also on one side that we are having like the path ahead and we know how to move forward, and we need probably to change some things and do some practical changes actually at all levels. And I think that's why I'm going to ask Paolo, what are you seeing in this ATMP's landscape that is true? Probably incomplete, misleading, too comfortable if we take the path that we all assumed, and what would you change at that
level? Thanks, Montse. First of all, thank you, Phacilitate, for inviting us. Very happy to be part of this panel, and also with the audience excited about today, but also for the meeting in September. My name is Paolo, as has been said. I work for ARM, the Alliance for Genetic Medicine. I lead our activities in Europe and Middle East. My job title is Vice President Public Affairs, Europe and Middle East, and I've joined ARM a few years ago, so I've been around with these guys and many of you for a few years. And ARM is a global advocacy organization. It's a leading cell and gene therapy organization at global level. And back to your question, Montse, our perspective as an organization is global, right? So and our real goal is that cell and gene sector and the whole ecosystem are successful anywhere. In Europe, and I'm a strong believer. I'm European. I'm a strong believer in Europe, including UK, and the whole region I'm working on. But in particular for Europe, we do have really many strengths. The challenge, I would like to say, you ask uncomfortable things. So we are facing, as a sector, multiple challenges that are coming all together. And some are sector related, some are broader. And the world is changing very fast. And we have, let's say, without going too much into the geopolitical part, but there are pressures for any regions to be more competitive and be able to reinvent itself in terms of ecosystem. And cell and gene is for sure the most growing sector in terms of science, in terms of perspective, in terms of changes that have happened in the industry, and also in terms of the challenges that it poses to the healthcare systems, because it's a whole thing that need to reinvent itself. And what's happening, and it's having its challenges itself. So cell and gene sector is not, it's immune from those challenges. And Europe is in a phase where, intended as a European Union, where its institutions are challenged and maybe not fit for purpose for the situation. So we're going to talk about legislation in Europe like the Biotech Act, and we are still in a phase where the policy and the ecosystem actions and responses are based on a world that is changing so fast that actually doesn't exist anymore. And that's, to me, is the main challenge. It's the main thing that we need to, as a community, to address, to move quickly, to make things happen and change very quickly. Because the pace that we used to have in the past is really not enough to cope with the change we're facing.
Well, thank you, Paolo, because I was listening to you and also to Jackie and to Jim, and I was thinking.
I can't hear you anymore, Montse.
You cannot hear me?
I can hear at least. So
you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay. So I was thinking that you were depicting this like an opportunity that we cannot actually miss. So maybe this is the truth that we say publicly always. This is an opportunity. Paolo, you seem you don't listen. You don't hear me? Probably you don't hear me. Okay. I will jump to Miguel, and then let's see if we can solve this out for you. But to Miguel, I will ask you something that, because I like everybody to react to what the other said. But now Paolo mentioned that it can be like an opportunity, a chance for Europe to become competitive, that we cannot waste this opportunity. And that might be the too comfortable saying that, okay, this is ATMP, Europe is the opportunity, but the incomplete question is that we might be losing already or not. So that's a little bit an extension of the question for you from the company perspective, from the overview perspective that you have.
I think we may be losing. But before we go there, thanks, Montse, for leading us through the discussion. It's great to be amongst friends. I can't see those that are online, that they're kind of already sending hello from Oxford and from everywhere. So it's great to be amongst friends to discuss something that is very relevant for all of us. And thanks, Phacilitate, for making this happen. Very quickly, I'm Miguel Ford. I'm CEO of a company, biotech startup, cell and gene therapy in Europe, and also immediate past president of ISCT and board member of ARM. That gives me a great opportunity to see some of the angles. And you're right, Montse, and Paolo was right. The potential in Europe is enormous, and we are failing on a responsibility if we don't deliver that potential. And delivering on that potential is not just enacting legislation, is acting on the legislation, is acting on the field. And we can discuss. Now, to act, you must have guidance, you must have legislation. Is the speed, the sense of urgency that we need to have, because I think, again, to Paolo's point, the opportunity is incredible, the potential is significant in Europe, and we all know that. But we are being slow to react. So facts and the environment is taking over us. I wanted to bring to all of you a concept that came to my mind as I was preparing the meeting today, which is, I would call it the HW concept. And why HW? It's kind of health and wealth. Why? Because we want patient access. And if we want patient access, we validate what we are doing. If we validate what we're doing, we get return on investment. So HW should be on our mind all the time: patient access and return on investment.
I think that's very appropriate that you bring this idea also to the table. It might divert a little bit the discussion, but I think it's worth to go back to this, because this is a concept that also talks about the equity, how we make it accessible for everybody, and a concept that is growing in more and more interest, and it's somewhere in today's discussion for sure, which is this customer experience. If we treat those that have access to ATMPs as patients, as customers, and how we see that, and actually the discussion on the return on investment. And this goes back to the health systems, how we can manage the access from the healthcare systems to these therapies for sure. So thank you for bringing these ideas. Paolo, I see you back. And we used your idea on we might be in a chance to make Europe competitive with that, Europe and beyond competitive with those new opportunities. And then we cannot miss it. It's something like that was also supported by Miguel. So thank you for that. So you're seeing now that we are not just having this a typical, let's see the roadmap, next step, we know everything, we just have everything under control, because I think it's worth that we are very much, rather than giving another generic roadmap discussion, we want to focus on what is still operationally difficult: the translation, the manufacturing, the access, the equity, and it was mentioned here. So thank you for bringing that. So I'd like to continue now. Let's continue with Miguel, and sorry for just changing a little bit the orders, but what do ATMP companies actually know privately that the policy discussions are still underestimated? So now you have some ideas, you are on the terrain, but you see this underrepresented in some policy discussions. And the Biotech Act, that is supposed to be this umbrella that is going to support this moving forward also for the biotech companies, what are you not seeing there? And how early do we really need to design this patient, clinician, and everybody on board with these discussions?
So the Biotech Act, obviously, I mean, the intention is to improve biotech in general with a specific focus on ATMP in Europe, understanding the value that it can bring to patients and very much to the system. It tries to address some of the shortcomings, some of the challenges, and I think there's probably two main areas of challenge. One is for a biotech in Europe. One is funding, and the other one is regulatory agility. And in funding comes several things. It comes the macro environment and some risk aversion and some context currently, which is not European alone, but becomes potentially more acute in Europe. And that's the public funding, the private funding. The public funding is also an important point, and actually Biotech Act addresses that specifically. And I've been postulating a lot to have flexible, rapid, small amounts of funds to support companies at early stage when they're really ramping up and generating initial clinical or preclinical data, so that they can go there with that and raise further. So it's important to find ways of funding companies at a very early stage, just before they have the de-risking data. When you have very good clinical data, you have a line of people investing in you. When you have a very good idea that you want to translate that science into a product, into a value proposition, into a company, that's why you need support. And it's not much money, but you need flexibility. One of the things we have to prevent is examples where people say, well, I cannot do this in Europe, it's too expensive. I cannot do this in Europe, it's too lengthy. I will go and do it somewhere else. I get success and I get acquired. And I don't need to put names on the examples, but we know that this happened. And it's a success for the company, but it's a failure for Europe. So funding, regulatory agility, ability to generate the data that supports your translational path will then lead to what I said before, which is you develop it, you get access to patients, you really fluid the system and have the return with patients treated and your investors, your stakeholders rewarded.
Well, thank you, Miguel, because you gave us the funding, the regulatory aspects, the generation of data, but I will ask Jim about infrastructure, because also there's this, what sounds good in policy but fails operationally because of the lack of infrastructures that can actually deliver.
I had to leave something for Jim, right? And it's very much up his street.
Yeah, but I can still pick up on what you said there, Miguel, because I think your health and wealth concept is it's a very good and nice one, and I think if we don't have the wealth, how can we have? I mean, we need the wealth to pay for the health, but basically. So I think it's a very extremely important topic, and I mean infrastructure. In the end of the day, I mean we also need the wealth, right? Obviously, our mission is to support the developers, to be able to reach a patient and perform first-in-man trials, etc. But obviously, in order for them to afford to use us, I mean, they actually need to have some funding to cover the costs. So I think it's very important. And again, Miguel, the problem, I guess, when you end up in the situation that you say, if it takes too long time and it's too costly, our challenge is, investing a lot in research in Europe, is that the benefits or the wealth will actually accrue somewhere else. And that is the situation we cannot really have in Europe. And so therefore, I think, yes, linking back to then infrastructure, how many infrastructure can we have? Then it depends in the end of the size of the ecosystem. How many clean rooms can be supported, in every country or every city, etc. So I think those considerations, on the European level should actually be taken into account, before you launch an initiative, because we know there are a lot of initiatives that is actually, suffering. But also think, I guess, a bit about the economic model that the infrastructure actually had. Is it only public funding? Is it only private funding? Or is there a mix? And I mean, in the end, that will actually tell you something about how you can operate. Because from at least from my perspective here in the Nordics, a lot of the infrastructure here has been very focused on supporting clinical trials for clinicians and researchers, but this hasn't been a designated infrastructure focused on supporting SMEs and private developers. And I think obviously that is something you need in at least, like every area of Europe or part of Europe. So I think it's a very important topic.
Well, thank you, Jim, because I also wanted to ask you, but I don't know if this is but it's okay, because we decided that we will talk a little bit about everything, right? And now that I see Paolo back, because I just want to know from you, how should we avoid building a Europe where only a handful of allied centers can generally deliver ATMPs? At the same time, we have to be very much focused on the most efficient way of delivering it. So I don't know if you want to take that very quickly, or we keep that for just a little bit of an additional thought, and then we jump to Paolo. You ready to answer that one for me now, Jim?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. So, but I think, again, linking back to what Miguel said, we really have to make sure that the developers has the right opportunities here in Europe, because otherwise, it's going to be more infrastructure fighting over ever, smaller and smaller cake, right? And if it's not going to be more cake, then everybody's going to have very small pieces in the end, and that is not going to be sustainable.
And I like when Miguel said prevent examples of what cannot be done in Europe, and probably we need to come with more examples of what can be done in Europe. So, I mean, whereas we are preparing the right conditions for that to happen, we can also be very actively promoting these individual and examples, which is very good. And I will just go to Jackie now, because trying to be very serious about the how we can just connect every single player in the landscape. And for example, I'm thinking also in investors, you have a lot of connection to that sector as well, the investment. What do investors see that ecosystems do not always want to hear? And then you hear sometimes, because now you are a very successful ecosystem in the UK area, and we have to talk more about how your experience is going to be like a reference for us implementing the Biotech Act and seeing where the gaps are. But what do you hear from investors? And sometimes from our perspective, is not always something that we will.
So I think you were asking what do investors still see as the gaps, even if you have a mature ecosystem infrastructure. I suppose investors and the companies that the investors invest in always want things quicker. Are they as slick as they could be? How can we make them slicker? How do you drive down clinical trial approval? The Biotech Act is driving it down to 76, I think, from memory. I can't remember, but they're driving it down. Why isn't it 30, for instance? So investors are always going to want it sooner, quicker, faster, and in a cheaper way, most efficient and quickest way. And that's what every ecosystem should be driving for sure. And I think it's easier now in the UK. We've been very fortunate in the UK because our government decided to invest in the ecosystem or infrastructure for ATMPs way back in 2011, and as they have in other European states. So we have quite a mature ecosystem. And that was one question I was going to say to Miguel, because I can see that it's far better if Europe acts together, for sure, the EU act together to make it more attractive. But I do also question about how much is the responsibility of the member states and how much is the responsibility of the Commission. And that's a difficult thing. But I think what we've certainly seen with the investors in the UK is they don't want to pay for the same thing again and again and again. So that's why we set up our manufacturing facility, because we heard from investors that they wanted to invest in these young companies that were coming out, of the universities, but they didn't want to give them each £30 million to build a manufacturing centre. So as a consequence, we proposed building a 12-module manufacturing centre to the UK government, and they funded that. So I think it's that agility and responding to what is a sensible need. And I think that's where, if we could all work together. Jim, you mentioned, do you need multiple clean rooms in multiple sites in multiple countries, or do we need specialist centres, for instance? So I think that's what investors see. They want it coordinated, they want it to be agile to respond to their needs, and they want it to be efficient and economically viable.
Well, I think that's very useful when we try to put the lenses of the investor and the corporates probably, and I know that probably Paolo has a lot to say about that as well because of the connections. I think we still need to think with the others, but I would keep one question about the customer experience regarding investment. I don't know if Paolo, you also want to address that when you answer Jackie. Jumping
so
in.
my comment actually is more linked to what has been said before, and links also to what Jackie said. One characteristic that Europe has, it's a big feature, is that Europe is a very large market. So it's in the pharma space, if you just keep the European Union, it's already about half of the size than the US, and it's the second largest market at global level. But Europe has not leveraged that so far. So there is a lot of fragmentation. There is, of course, national, the way the European Union is framed and governance. You have healthcare budget and spending is at national level, and then UK is part of geographically of Europe, but belongs to different system. It's more independent, as Switzerland or other countries that are still in the same area. But actually, leveraging the market to develop a strong sector in Europe and to develop new ways of paying for drugs, for example, that's a way that has a lot of promise, and where people at national level, at European level, are discussing and trying to find a way through. There's a debate at European level, around the Critical Medicines Act, and discussions about joint procurement. That has been something started with COVID, and that's just an example, right? So and leveraging the market is not just using a purchasing power, a stronger purchasing power, and getting better prices. Actually, it's not that at all. It's also setting up a framework and a system that basically allows what Miguel and Jim were saying earlier on, that you can basically have new economic models, new business models, new pricing models, as I was saying, that make the whole thing viable and actually also equitable across Europe. So you could have, for some indications, broad access across Europe. You could have funding, financing, R&D through the market, because investors are a very important point in the chain. But if you cannot pour money in one side, pour money in, in a basin, if there is a hole, right? So if you have, the market has to drive the whole thing, and the market needs to be done in a way that makes Europe stronger and makes the chances for European patients to get better access, more access to innovation easier.
Well, I think I like what you say that to make a difference, leveraging the market. But my question to you, and probably to all of you, and I would like to just to react to the others' comments, because I like the way Paolo mentioned, Jackie and Jim mentioned Miguel. I think this is the way we have to bring the conversation forward, not just like in a siloed way of thinking. So who could do this? Who could make this difference in leveraging the market? Because the Biotech Act is supposed to do that, but you still think that we need new business models, new ways of, having this equitable access. So who is who's the one that is going really to be able to make a difference there, or what? Because we're still going in circles always on the same diagnosis, the same intended solutions, but not assigning, like allocating the right responsibilities for that to happen, if I may say.
Yeah, and I can jump in quickly, and but my view on this is that Biotech Act can do part of it, but not all of it. So it's not designed to cover that part. And there is something also at national level, country level, including the UK and Switzerland and other countries that are not part of the EU, to make together, agree on a market approach that could help. And and instruments I mentioned is this joint procurement, but there may be others, right? But it needs to be something where there is an agreement that you want to incentivize innovation to come to Europe and actually develop in Europe.
And Jackie, Miguel, Jim, your insights about that probably.
Yeah, if I can jump in now, I think it all comes down to making sure that you're able to get your product, as I said, to the patient. It seems that I'm always hammering on the same, but it's easy to come back from there, because it's important to develop that way, prepare it that way, and the developers have the responsibility of making it user-friendly, usable, and prepare the conditions to be used. But then the other player are the ones that will enable it to be paid for and used and really reaching the patient. So one thing that is important across Europe is battle against fragmentation between different member states, fragmentation between different centers of excellence, fragmentation between different areas. We will do a lot better if we do it together, and if we support the different elements of that path of development through the ecosystem. And I mentioned before the funding and the regulatory agility. It's also great to have a system where you can have others that you can go for support, or aggregate in centers where you can share experience, find talent, and really accelerate your development. And then obviously you will collaborate also with those hospitals and those clinical areas where the products are being used, again complying with the responsibility of making the products usable. And then obviously, the model that needs to go away from the borders and become more a pan-European approach. And we started this discussion between the responsibilities of the European Commission and responsibilities of member states. I think it's the responsibilities of Europeans to actually promote this.
That's very important. Jim, Jackie, you have a reaction, or you want to move forward?
I can comment a bit there. Because we haven't talked so detailed on the Biotech Act, and I think there's a lot of promise there. But and then the procurement aspects that Paolo mentioned is maybe more linked to the Innovation Act and the upcoming Competitiveness Fund, that I think might be even more important for ATMP developers actually, than maybe the Biotech Act in the end of the day. Let's see. We haven't seen all the detail. But I think another very important aspect is obviously the JCA, or joint clinical assessment. So in the end, if you could link the joint clinical assessment with kind of a joint procurement, then you can really get to a stage where you can access a lot of bigger number of patients, which would then unlock much more investments in the end of the day. Because I think when you look at investments in Europe, we obviously know that we're lagging seriously behind, primarily US. But I think if you look at the landscape here, it's my view that we are competing with a lot of other technologies that brings revenues a lot quicker than ATMPs. So, and I'm not only talking about pharmaceuticals. AI and quantum technologies, etc. or missiles and drones, for that matter. So I think, what we really need is some success stories, where we can show that, yes, you can invest in an ATMP, company, and that company can actually launch a product in the market that's been developed and researched in Europe, ideally, and then the investor will actually get a return on their investment. So I think that's definitely something we would need, and hopefully these policies, aligned will enable us that,
And I like very much the perspective, and you all keep saying that one of our assets is market size, and I would ask Jackie to answer a little bit what it has been said if you want to, but I would also like to ask you from the UK perspective how you see also, we are referring a lot to our member states and the fragmentation and the diversity, of the lack of interoperability across EU files, it was also mentioned. So how you see that from the UK perspective? Also, because like I said, I think that your experience is a very good reference for the implementation of what we are just developing and trying to implement. So we're talking about market size, but we also talked about, and Jim discussed about that as well, what investors find worth to look at. And my question is if equity and this scalable delivery and the market size could really become part of the value proposition that Europe needs to put forward, because we cannot just emulate the models of other regions in the world. So it's like a very, a multiple question in one, but I think that it's a good point to discuss as well.
Yeah, look, it's difficult, isn't it? In the UK, we have been fortunate, as I said earlier, and we do have an example. Autolus is an example of early investment, investment in a university, bright idea with Martin Pooley, that became Autolus' spin out. They were invested through Innovate UK, who fund us, and they used our facility, and now they've got an approved product. So I think it just takes a while to get there, and it's still a new field. It takes 10 years to develop the product, so actually they did pretty well. So I think it is possible. Working as a single state now brings agility. For sure, it brings agility. It gives you a bit more flexibility. It allows you to take greater risks, but more importantly, move legislation on more quickly. So that's all in the positives. The negatives is the EU is the big market size, for sure. But then, that's a real positive for the EU. And where you're slowed is you've got 27 member states trying to agree a way forward. And that's a fantastic thing. I'm not saying it's a negative, but it just makes it more difficult, doesn't it? And I think, I think Miguel said we should think as Europeans. And, when you've got 27 different voices, it's sometimes difficult to think as Europe, conceptually. And plus there's different skills, there's different experiences in all the different member states, different levels of experience. So what do I think would make the EU more attractive? I think if there was 28 member states, possibly. But seriously, I think if there was greater coordination and perhaps agreeing on 80% and 80% is good enough, or 90%, and not spending an extra 5 years on that additional little value add potentially. And then one other thing that I think the Commission needs to deliver on is when it brings in legislation, I'm thinking about the Clinical Trial Directive, that was slowed greatly because of the portal. We've got the SOHO regulation now. How is that going to be implemented throughout Europe? It's not clear to me, and I don't think it'll be done on time. So having a realistic timetable, but also understanding the urgency, because I agree with Jim. You need to start this now because China is storming ahead. So did that answer your question, Monty? Because you asked me loads of questions and I've tried to answer them all in one answer.
Yeah, but I think that's great, and I see many comments also on the chat, and I like to think, because we keep trying to make it actual unique space between UK and the EU, and because I think it makes all sense. I mean, we are having this event all together. We will be in Advanced Therapies Europe all together. But then there's some comments here, and it's true. Some customers, some clients here around Cambridge and Europe, they struggle with the slow journey here and probably the agile pathways that you have in the UK. So I'd like to also to ask from your perspective how connected our ecosystems are when there's this, first different approach to the markets. I mean, it's different markets, it's different regulatory bodies, it's different pathways at the same time, but we are trying to work it as a unit in most of the cases, or make a continuum. So I think we can just help each other more. So the market size in Europe and the EU, let's say, and also the agility that you have in the UK, for us to be really like a driver for the changes in Europe, probably. And Paolo, I saw that you raised your hand.
Yeah, just reacting to Jackie. So I completely agree, and I think it's the overall perception, but I would like to challenge the overall perception. So to me, Europe doesn't need to be slow, and has not to be slow all the time and follow the traditional pathways and governance. So, and the example is the joint procurement, right? So you can go through a very long and complex process, your EMA and JCA and the national level, HTA, and then pricing process, or you can have a joint procurement pan-European level, where drugs with a small patient population across Europe, and you have, you're very quick and cover the whole Europe. So they're actually, and the UK or Switzerland, other countries could be part of some of those things. And in defense, we see similar things, right? So, or AI, we could see similar things. So why not seeing similar things in healthcare? So the assumption that Europe is slow and consensual and the UK is very efficient but very small, I don't think is necessarily something that we need to accept as a given. So I think we can challenge as a community.
And we need more examples of what can be done in Europe, like we said with Miguel. Miguel, I see you willing to champion.
Yeah, no, I think this is coming to one thing that we always recognize, which is it's great, the diversity in Europe. What we need to make sure is that diversity does not become a slowdown effect. And we're able to work together. And I was also saying kind of member states as one, kind of, it would be great to have Europe as a one member state, or a quick decision and an example. And again, obviously, the market rules, and if the market goes across Europe, over to Switzerland, and obviously that is where, again, we go back to the discussion before. It's being used, it's treating patients, and it's kind of and it's rewarding the investment. So work as one, make it flexible, challenge the acknowledged fact that it's always slow. We just have to make it fast. Right. I still remember some time ago we had this GMO thing. I mean, everybody was talking about it. Just do it, right? I mean, just do it. I mean, why do everybody agrees? We're just going to put in legislation, right? Let's do it. Done. Move to the next one.
No, that's great. That's great. And Tim and Jackie, I don't know if we're talking about fragmentation, about 27 different places to do business, right? But I don't know. I know that the 28th regime, I don't know if you're familiar with that, Biotech Act, we know that it's not standalone. It's just connected to so many different things, to the EHCS, to the AI Act, to the Innovation Act, to everything that is going to put in place, to the Critical Medicines Act. So, but there's one particular thing that is addressing the single market, which is the 20th regime, is making something more. I mean, I know it's not meant for the CNG market only, but it can be like an enabler for implementing these ambitions. I don't know if should we push more for that. It's just to put the focus on this like a solution to make it more straightforward. So it's just a question I'm just introducing here, but please react to what has been said also in the chat, because there are very, very interesting questions in the chat that I'm going to bring to you now. So what about the way you know about the 28 regime, if it's going to be something that is going to help at that level? Does somebody want to jump on that? Really, it's something. It's tricky because it's one of it's more and more discussed. So it's trying to be more harmonizing most of the regulatory frameworks that we have at the 27 member states. But then I'm just going to go for one last question before we just take some of the questions in the chat. We haven't still talked about workforce, and I just wanted to ask Jackie. Do you see differences in the way we approach workforce in the UK and probably in the member states in Europe or a regional level in Europe? How do you build a workforce? Because you have a broader industrial landscape, or at least ATMP's landscape. How you build the right workforce for that to be filled correctly?
I'll be honest, I can't comment on how different it is between the UK and the various member states. I know that some of the member states in the EU have spent quite a lot of time and effort on building the workforce. Certainly in the UK, we introduced apprenticeship schemes to allow people to, come up through the ranks. But these apprenticeship schemes were for young school workers or for people wanting to reskill into regulatory affairs. So it spanned. And we also had an online platform and in-house training where we've upskilled hundreds of people. And also through the Advanced Therapy Treatment Centre network, we've got a real focus on upskilling the clinical staff. So we've taken it almost in chunks to, upskill new people or change their skills, build resources to really accelerate the training of people coming into the industry, and then look after the clinical side, which I think is equally as important, because there's no point having brilliant products that are getting paid for if the clinicians and the nurses and the pharmacists don't know how to use them.
And I know that every single good example is going to be important for Europe and the European Commission now, because I think that we are, at the same time, we increase the landscape with, for example, the manufacturing, which is a big thing also for Europe. We have to also do it in parallel with the strong workforce at all levels to fill these value chains. Jim,
if I may say, that's where the EU probably has an advantage, because if you have 27 member states and you can share the load and then bring it together, that would be fantastic.
We have the market, we have the shared curricula, let's say, but we also need to understand the way you address this apprenticeship, for example, that you were mentioning. And what about, Jim, do you have a comment here? Because I would leave like 5-10 minutes or 8 minutes for the questions on the chat, but if you have some comments about this specific subject.
I mean, from my perspective, I think training is one of those subjects also that is a bit like, when people talk about it, they talk about different things really. So I think, is it a workforce? Which workforce? Is it the manufacturing workforce? Is it the academic workforce or hospital workforce? So I think it's very important at least to take a broad view on that and really, try to fill the gaps that we know exist out there. Because otherwise, we cannot create an industry if we don't have the qualified people, to take on the jobs that the industry needs, basically.
Good, great. I don't know if you want to continue there, but I saw that in the chat there's some comments supporting some of the answers that you gave to us. But I think that there's one question that it says. It's not just about, Fatima says, it's not just about speed, it's also about the cost efficiency and being able to manufacture and deliver a product for treatment at a price that can be equitable and sustainably administered by health systems. So I think this is a very good point. It's just, the matter of the cost is also raised by some other members of the attendees. So some comments here from Paolo, for example, that you see so many different stakeholders, and also Miguel, that you are actually representing a broad community.
Yeah, so very quick on this, and I'm going to link to other later questions about access, pricing, the burden to launch in different countries and stuff like that. So to me, they're all interconnected, and it's commercial viability of products for partners. So if you don't find a way for, pricing and the whole commercial process to be viable for companies and for payers or healthcare systems, you don't get products to the market. That's, as simple as that. And what I see, and we see is that the current frameworks are basically fit for, an older paradigm. And we need to make changes, and these changes are happening. And one thing we have not mentioned so far is MFN in the US, that is having, an influence on the UK and Europe and, a global level. And basically what we expect is that this pricing reimbursement process will evolve quite quickly and will move towards linear, more efficient approaches, because having, let's say, going through the whole process, and this is back to Dilip's question, the whole process that is very burdensome for developers, and it's linked with very high risk, cannot result in fair prices for patients, but it will result in companies basically not deciding not to launch because their risk and the burden for them is too high. So this is something that nobody wants, right? So it will be the outcome that nobody wants. So we need to find solutions that work on both sides.
Somebody else in the panel want to react to that? Jim, you were nodding, and Miguel. Otherwise, there's some other questions, and I want to spare like the last 4 minutes for one answer from each of you on a very bold question. Miguel.
I think the point that Paola made is very important in terms of the changes that are adapting to a pan-European approach, namely on assessing and valuing the products, enabling their reimbursement and paid, that needs to be consequent to the investment and the value that is being delivered. And if we do that, then we're making a pan-European approach that could lead to what we're all working here, which is increase the efficiency and benefits of the system, and above all, again, back to the same thing, treating patients.
On that, Miguel, and we did a piece of work with the Office for Health Economics a couple of months ago, which we released, and I think your point is well taken, because what we looked at there was what was the benefit to the individual, the benefit to the health service by freeing up resources in the long term and freeing up costs in the long term, and then the societal benefit because people are fit and healthy, or their child is fit and healthy and they're able to go back to work. And I think where we all fall down, as in all of the countries within Europe, is the burden always falls to the health service budget. It's the health service that's got to fix it. Because actually, this is a societal benefit long term. If we can, I hate to say cure, but if we can treat somebody with a one-off treatment for an awful long time, then that frees up so many resources, and I don't think that's taken into account. And the way that the HTAs operate, they're not able to take that into account. So there needs to be a shift in the way that we assess these one-off treatments, I think.
Thank you. And I think that this is very reassuring, answering already some of the questions that I see in the chat. I mean, for example, I see that another huge issue that the member states often apply or incur in is a delay in the reimbursement of products even after they've been approved by the EMA. This can be several years, for example, in Ireland. This is what Terry Macaulay says. I don't know if you have a comment here, or probably another nice question I see here is that the member state each member state having to review and approve, and why the idea of a central governance is not conceived. So it's a little bit on the same as the delays that we incur. So I think that there's some questions, but we have only 2 minutes. So I would need a word from each of you saying, and it's also answering to the biggest opportunity that Ali Kabiri says as well. So For me, the last question is: Europe will not win the next wave of ATMPs unless. And I want you to end this sentence. The four of you. Let's start by Jim, but you've not been speaking for a while.
Yeah, I think in the end, unless we're able to, buy them, pay for them, I think it's a bit of a boring answer, maybe, but I think we really need that.
Jackie.
I agree with Jim, but also I think that coordination, collaboration, what can be done better to work together, to share the inputs, share the outputs.
Miguel.
Europe needs to work as a member state.
Okay, that's clear, and that answers also the central governance. Paolo.
I agree with all of the above, and I will add, Europe needs to be continue to be a reliable player in this space, because Europe is ahead of the curve on many things and needs to keep that edge. So we are reliable, we are based on science, we have principles and on equity regulations. So all these things need to be kept together with what my colleagues have just mentioned. That is super important.
But thank you very much. I think that we almost answered everything. I see one last here, that where do you see the biggest opportunity for enabling technologies that improve trial efficiency without changing the therapeutic product itself? I think it's very good that we keep one question unanswered, because this gives the opportunity and the offer to all of you meeting in Barcelona in September, and inviting all of us, because we will be there. The important thing is that these four speakers will probably be there, and you would be able to talk to them and ask them in person these things that we all have in mind that are very important for our ATMP landscape in Europe.